All right, welcome everyone. I wanted to let you all know in advance that we're actually recording the session today. Before we start with the presentation, I would like to share that the presentation for the attendees, there was going to be a post-event email that will be sent, and it will include the slides and the respective links that we'll be sharing today. To introduce myself, my name is Shirley Yee. I'm a business analyst with the research department at CPG. And with us today, we have Janet Todd, who has been with CPG for 8 years and is our Director of Curriculum Development at CPG within Education and Wellness. She strategizes and delivers the financial and education and wellness resources that is offered in-person conferences as well as the web-based learning you find on cpg.org, which she will share more about later. She holds her doctorate in finance from Michigan State University, where she taught finance, economics, and introductory accounting for 15 years. So thanks for being here, Janet. We also have Andrea Hassler. She's a Deputy Academic Director and an Assistant Research Professor in Financial Literacy at GFLEC, which is an acronym for Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center. And the center is in George Washington University School of Business in DC. And if you're curious to know more about this organization, you can find their link in the chat that we'll post. Jermaine will be helping with that. The research that she does in financial literacy and capability goes on to inform policy as well as develop and promote financial literacy programs, both in the US as well as around the world. She holds a doctorate in finance as well as a master's and bachelor's in business and economics from the University of Basel in Switzerland. So why are we here today? Why did we partner with GFLEC and work with Andrea? Well, CPG is really interested in knowing more about the Episcopal Church's lay employees, their financial wellness. And in order to do that, we launched a survey to kind of gather that information last year that you all might have taken, might be aware of. But if you aren't, we'll be presenting the results here today. We'll hear more about Janet later on, where she will kind of go through the content, the results that we received, how it's going to be used for the financial knowledge and behaviors that they use for their content development and education and wellness. So, Andrea, before we actually dive into the results, can you kind of tell us, the viewers, about the survey that you designed?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Shirley. And thanks so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk about our research. So we actually collected the data last summer, 2020. So right after the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. And we have included in the survey about 48 questions. And the questions span from financial literacy to financial situations to money management practices, but also we asked about the impact of COVID-19 on personal finances. And the aim was to gain a comprehensive picture of the financial circumstances and also the needs of lay employees that will then help us raise awareness on one end, but also inform educational program and their direction. And we received responses from 1,380 lay employees. So thank you so much for everybody who participated. Shirley, I think you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. When we were thinking about the results of the survey, we know that when we look at the results of themselves, it's not very meaningful. So there must be some sort of group that you kind of compare the results to.
Yes, exactly. That's what we did. So we have a nationally representative sample that we use. It's called the National Financial Capability Study. It's a project of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and it's publicly available data. And the last one we have, that's the data's been collected every 3 years since 2009, is from 2018. So what we took is we took a national representative sample, which includes 27,000 US adults. And we took a subsample of as a comparison group, because we know that lay employees have demographic characteristics that need to be matched. So the subsample that we compare it to is at least 25 years old, work full-time or part part-time for an employer and have at least some college or associate degree. And that's a comparison group. And if you see in my statistics later on, when it says 2018 NFCS, that's a comparison sample.
Great. All right, so this is where I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Go back one actually. All right. So you mentioned that you also assess the financial knowledge. I'm curious, what are some of the questions that you asked?
So yes, we call them the big three financial literacy questions. So the founder of GFLAG, Professor Lusardi, designed those many years ago. And they're a measure of the basic financial literacy, basic financial concepts that we have to know to navigate all the difficult financial decisions that we have to make every day. And these questions are included in many surveys. And I brought them here. Thank you, Shirley, for the slide. And you see there are three basic questions, and I just wanted to mention two of those. So the first one is all about interest rate. So if I go quickly through it and say, so it says, suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in account if you let the money to grow? And you see on the right hand side the possible answer options. So it's more than 102, exactly 102, or less than 102. So we are not interested in your math skills or in the math skills of the survey respondents. It's more the understanding that every year there's a 2% interest rate that's been added to the principal or to the savings that we have in our account. So the first one is about interest rate. The second one tests knowledge on inflation, and the third one tests knowledge about risk. And here this question is about risk diversification. So it asks, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than the stock mutual fund. And that's, of course, that's false. So you see, and I will be talking about risk and risk literacy and understanding of these type of concepts a little later on.
Great. So what were the results of these questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have that here in the next slide. So overall, we find that only about half of lay employees, so 49% that we surveyed, could correctly answer those big three financial literacy questions that we just saw. And that's the light blue bar, what you see here. And then you see, if you compare it to the dark blue bar, which is the NFCS sample, our comparison sample, that it is slightly higher than the comparison group. But if you think that these questions assess basic financial knowledge, the number is still a little too low. And so because if you think 51% couldn't answer the big three questions correctly. So there is room for improvement when it comes to financial literacy. And we can also look actually at the three questions separately. So the next slide, I have those results here. And we see that overall, light blue bar again, lay employees, dark blue bar, our comparison sample, we see that they have, between the two groups, we see similar patterns. So on the very left, you see the interest rate. And the people who answered the first question, the interest rate questions correctly. And we see that that's the concept that people overall know the best. But then on the right hand side, and that's why I have it even with that red square around it, we see that risk diversification, so the risk question, is what people struggle the most with. And we see that in many different surveys, that risk and uncertainty is really a topic that it's particularly difficult for people to grasp. And that result is persistent through all demographic subsamples and even around the globe.
So why is knowing risk diversification so important for people to understand? And we see that, you know, like they didn't do as well compared to the other subject questions.
So, I mean, first of all, risk is a difficult concept to understand. That's out of question. And why is it important to understand? Is because risk shows up in so many different areas of personal finance decision making, including also retirement planning. It's not only, we have been in a very uncertain situation over the past 18 months, but still, and that there, of course, it was very, very important to navigate that uncertain environment and understand risk, especially risk when it comes to health. But even here, when you think about retirement planning, we have to make so many important decisions. Say, for example, how much to invest, right, in my savings account, in my retirement account, how to invest it, but then also when can I stop working? And then once I'm retired, how much can I spend from my savings every month to not outlive my funds and so on? So these are very important and consequential decisions that we have to make and are by far not easy, but they all include a basic understanding of risk.
Oh, great. Now, actually, I have a question for Janet. From the CPG perspective, where do you see CPG helping in this aspect of these areas of financial questions?
So CPG has the Education Wellness Department, of which I am a part of, and our goal is to educate people in finance and health wellness. And these three are the main topics. We base all of our education on the research that's out there, and a lot of it, Andrea just already mentioned. We use FINRA, we use Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and of course we use the GFLEC heavily because it's based on our specific population. And we develop a lot of courses, so you could get on our website and we'll show you how to do that at the end of the this webinar. You can get on and you can find a lot of courses. We have a learning center, which has a lot of information that's written in there about diversification, about inflation, about interest rates. And specifically, if you click on Finance, your roadmap to savings and investments, we have a lot of information about what the different investment options are and investment strategies. We also talk about how to select financial planners, which is really important. If 51% of people are really not sure exactly what these financial concepts are, it's very important to work with somebody who can help you through some of these difficult conversations. We also do some partnering with Fidelity. So for those of you that are in either our retirement savings program or the lay defined contribution plan, Fidelity is our contractual service provider. And we partnered with them to do a webinar called Navigating Market Volatility, which was especially important during the pandemic. As Andrea mentioned, there was a lot of movement up and down, and being able to handle or understand the risk that comes with that is very important. And you can find that on our website in our webinar area. Again, all the information of how to find that we'll talk about at the end of this webinar. And I see Jermaine has also put in CPG has 2 people who are dedicated to doing financial discussions. So if you have questions about risk, CPG can certainly help you talk through that by calling our financial discussion folks. And also Fidelity has a lot of tools. So if you have one of those 2 programs I mentioned, you can get into your net benefits account, and they have a lot of risk diversification information and also the ability to call them and talk with them. So all of this research is something that we heavily rely on and put it into our programs so that we can focus on what our clients really need to understand. That was a little long-winded for that question.
Yeah. Oh no, that was great. Thank you, Janet. That's definitely a wealth of resources and information that at least our attendees can start kind of looking into. Now, Andrea, when you look at the knowledge question results, or when we look at those, looking at from the perspective of financial situation behaviors, what did your survey reveal?
Yeah, so overall, we asked many different questions about their personal finances, the situation, and money management. And this is an overarching question here that I wanted to include in this presentation today. It asks overall thinking about asset, debt, and savings, including everything. How satisfied are you with your current personal financial condition? And we see here in the slide that only 28%, if you think, of lay employees are satisfied with their current personal financial condition, and 46% are moderately satisfied. So that just gives you a little bit of an overview that there is room for improvement again, and that definitely learning more about how to manage personal finances could also help in this realm here. And that's actually in line with also the NFCS subsample responses we got when we assessed the same identical question. Now we also analyzed 3 indicators of short-term money management and precautionary savings. And that's shown here in this slide. And we found that around 30 to 40% of lay employees struggle with short-term money management, which can then lead to less satisfaction about their personal finances. So, and specifically, we see that people did not save over the past year. So 43%, that's on the very left, 43% of lay employees did not save in the past year. And again, the light blue bars are lay employees and the dark blue bars our comparison sample. And then at the same time, we also see that 33%, that's the middle 2 bars, reported having difficulties covering monthly expenses and paying all bills. And 42% have not set aside any emergency or rainy day funds. And if you view it against an NFCS comparison sample, you see that lay employees do slightly better, but again, it could be better in terms of savings and preparing for financial emergencies.
Yeah, when I look at the left slide, it looks like more can definitely save over the past year. But when we look at this kind of short-term savings kind of behavior, we all also tend to think about how much debt can also impact people's ability to save. So any results on the debt end?
Yes, that's exactly correct. Debt and debt servicing obligation play a huge role in all of our household budgets, I would say. So we asked actually, again, a more overarching question, which asks, do you feel you have too much debt? And one in 4 lay employees, these are the dark red bubbles there, said that they feel they have too much debt. And another 30% neither agreed nor disagreed. They're just like, I don't know if I have too much debt right now or not. But overall, it says it leaves us basically with less than half who said that they do not feel they have too much debt. So, and then not only feeling overburdened by that, but also expensive short-term money management behaviors are signs of financial distress and can add to the ability to not being able to save. Because, for example, so we see that here in this slide that 24% on the very left of lay employees use their credit cards in a way that accrue a lot of additional fees that we need to pay on top of the credit card balance. And these behaviors that can trigger high credit card usage fees include, for example, paying only the minimum amount, or paying the outstanding balances late, or exceeding the credit card limit, or using also the card for cash advances. So that's another way where that accrues a lot of interests on top of the balance that we have to pay anyway. And then we see on the very right that 10% use at least one type of alternative financial services, which include payday lenders, also pawn shops, or they got an auto title loan. And these short-term payment methods actually ask or charge a very, very high fee. And that can contribute to financial struggles and can also lead to the inability to amortize debt, but also to result in personal insolvency. So that can really have long-term and consequential effects on somebody's personal finances.
Now, Janet, I'm sure from education and wellness, looking at these results also can be very insightful. What can you tell us about from you and your team, what you're able to contribute in these aspects?
So one of the questions that Andrea's team asked was how satisfied you feel with your financial condition. And another term for that is financial wellness. That's kind of the way we look at it. How well do you feel? How satisfied do you feel? And a lot of it does revolve around your short-term spending, but we also know that your short-term spending is defined by the behaviors that you have on your day-to-day basis. So a lot of the things that we do in this particular area of education focuses on the behavior, and we try to focus on things that we know that we have to tell you what things are, but we also like to try to give you some hints and tips of how you can focus your behavior in ways that are not overwhelming. So for instance, Andrea mentioned that there's a lot of people who are having expensive credit card behaviors. So they're incurring fees, etc. So one of the ways to not incur a fee is to make sure that you pay that balance on time. And one of the ways to do that is to try to make sure that you match the inflows of your paychecks with when your bills are due. And if they don't match, call the company up and ask them, you know, I get paid on the 15th. Can we make this bill due on the 17th or the 18th? And most of the time they will work with you. It's not a problem. So that can help eliminate some of those fees. Banking fees, same thing. Don't go to ATMs that are not your own. And making sure that, again, the cash management, you don't get overdraft fees. I remember learning that lesson the hard way. I stayed within my budget for groceries, but I bought them 2 days before the paycheck came in. And unbeknownst to me, all of a sudden there was this extra fee that I incurred. And, you know, back when I had a family, a $25, $36 fee meant that I couldn't spend that money somewhere else. It dipped, you know, very much into my budget. So just being aware of where you are. And if you do have debt, then make sure that you have some strategies that reward you along the way for that debt reduction. And avoiding these fees is one way to reduce the debt, because the money you save on fees, you can put towards your debt, or towards saving for emergency, or even saving for long-term strategies. So these are just some things that we talk about. And we also, especially in our in-person conferences, ask people to share with one another, you know, what works, because financial well-being doesn't mean you're rich. It means that you're satisfied with the finances you have and you feel comfortable living within them.
Great. Now, when we think about kind of being able to save for the short term, right? We can kind of think about how that can contribute to our long-term kind of savings and debt management, the implications that it has. Andrea, how does this affect the long-term planning for events such as retirement?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, exactly. So all these financial decisions are interlinked. So in the context of retirement savings, we ask a variety of questions to analyze retirement preparedness for lay employees. And for this presentation, I brought here one of these questions, and they asked, I worry. So how do you agree with that following statement? And the statement was, I worry about running out of money in retirement. And you can actually see here on the left-hand side is the pie chart for CPG lay employees. And you see that 16% of lay employees are not worried. So only 16% of lay employees are not worried about running out of money in retirement. And almost half of all respondents agreed with the statement that they are worried. And the remaining 39%, we're not sure. That's the green part there. They neither agreed nor disagreed, which could indicate that they are not aware how much, or they do not know how much savings they will have accumulated by the time they retire or will need during retirement. These are difficult questions and calculations that we have to make during our working years. And you can see that the findings here are similar for the NFCS sample. Before, just going back to the last slide that we have, we saw that there is a little bit of a bigger difference between the NFCS sample and the lay employees. And you might then think or be deceived, oh, it's actually good compared to the comparison sample. But still, if you look, 25%, so 1 in 4 had accrued some high interest on credit cards. That's still not a result we want to achieve, and which we can, as Janet said, we can overcome by providing resources so that we are all aware what's going to happen if we use credit cards expensively.
And Janet, I understand that there's a very useful tool that people can use for being able to plan ahead. What tools do you guys have?
And it's called Plan Ahead Calculator. We hired a company to design a calculator that it knows our pension plans. So if you're in the lay defined contribution plan or the lay defined benefit plan, and if there happen to be any clergy out there, the clergy plan, there's a calculator that is specifically built in the provisions of each of those plans. And then you're able to go in there and you're able to put in information about how much you're currently making, how much you've currently saved, how much you're putting away in savings. There are some advanced information out there as well about Social Security. It will calculate it for you, or you can go out to Social Security and figure out how much you'll have in retirement as part of your sources. And it will also let you use a partner or spouse's information, so you can do it as a couple if you are doing finances as a couple. And it will give you a score as to how retirement ready you currently are. And if you get a score somewhere between, say, 90 or 100%, what that means is that you are able to, with the forecast of your income right before you retire, with the forecast of the retirement income coming in and expenses, you'll be able to cover all of those retirement expenses. If you're somewhere down in 50, 60, 70%, you might say, oh, I'm not that comfortable, that I might only have about that much. So you'll be able to go in and say, well, what if I save a little bit more? So you can adjust your inputs a little bit and it will run new calculations. We also have a calculator for people who are close to retirement, because one of the big worries is running out of money in retirement as well. And this is the Retirement Savings Spending Calculator. And this one is one of my favorites because you put in how much you've saved and it will tell you within a 90% percent is what it's set up for, of how long that money's going to last and how much you can take out if you put in how long you think you're going to live, how much you can take out and not outlive your funds. And that's what most people are worried about. And it also does include that you'll be taking out a little bit more each year to keep up with inflation. So it's not, just a static number. It does only project up to 3 years at a time because it knows that situations will change. And so then you can go back in and rework it. But it does allow you to do things, add in special expenses and so forth that you might incur in the future. For instance, you have this big retirement trip that you're going to do, and so you can calculate all of that in there. So it's really, really helpful. And the other thing that we did is we have an e-learning course called 5 Years to Retirement, Your Roadmap to Retirement Readiness. And there's a version for both our lay employees out there. And it talks all about the things you need to consider in your retirement plan, your lifestyle, your cash management, your health considerations, where your income's coming from, how you're going to plan for survivors, and most importantly, roadblocks. What are things that might throw you off the track, either before or after retirement? And we've also designed some webinars around that as well, and some workshops. So if you get invitations to those, please join in, because we have a lot of information in this area. And then, of course, call for a financial discussion as well.
Yes, and I see, so we have the links for those calculators posted in the chat, so please check that out. All right, so now let's tie all this information that Andrea has presented to us together. So Andrea, you spoke about measuring the financial knowledge as well as money management. So what's the connection between these two kinds of information?
So yes, you see that on my next slide. It's actually very highly linked. So it's highly correlated, as you see among research, as we say among researchers with all of our data. And it's not just with that data set that we analyzed, with everything, with every other data set I've touched around financial literacy and financial situation. So we see that those who are financially literate are more likely to have precautionary savings, are less likely to feel they have too much debt, are also less likely to engage in expensive money management behavior, what we just discussed before, and are then also more likely to plan and save for retirement. So that ties all the different topics together, what we have seen. So that's why financial education and knowledge is so powerful.
And we talked a lot about the financial situation, but also we know the past basically year and a half, almost 2 years, it's anything but normal. And so we were able, right, to include a couple COVID questions in terms of what people were anticipating. What did we see from those?
Yes, exactly. Right before the survey went out, actually, COVID hit. So we went back and added a few questions. And of course, it was right at the beginning, right? So the questions we asked were more like what people expect about the impact of the pandemic, that the impact of the pandemic might have on their personal finances. So one of the questions was, what level of threat do you think the pandemic poses to your personal finances? And we see that almost 1 in 3, so 30%, these are the last two bars that you see at the bottom, reported that the pandemic poses a high or very high threat to their personal finances. And 45% considered it a moderate threat. So, and given this finding that the pandemic poses such a high threat to personal finances, we also expected to see an impact on financial anxiety and stress levels. So we added also additional questions that asked about financial anxiety and stress among lay employees in the midst of the crisis. And we found that 40% agreed that thinking about their personal finances can make them feel anxious. So, although I have to say, we have these more dire results here. And of course, the pandemic and the financial consequences that arose from the pandemic were devastating for all of us, I think, and impacted us. But still, what's good to see is that the majority of lay employees perceived the COVID-19 as a threat. Yes, that's what we see, but most of them were confident that they can actually overcome the financial consequences triggered by the pandemic. And that was this question here that we asked. So how confident are you that you and your household will recover from the adverse financial effects of the pandemic? And we see that in fact, 88% of lay employees were very to somewhat confident about recovering from the adverse financial effects of the pandemic.
Now, Janet, in your experience, where do you see this fear or anxiety that people can have from, experiencing the unknown?
Yeah, we see that all the time in talking with our participants, especially when we're in the in-person situations where you can talk to them a little bit more in depth one-on-one. A lot of them would just say they were paralyzed because they just didn't know where to begin. They just didn't know where to start. And then, of course, with the pandemic, there was so much unknown going on that it was really difficult. And as Andrea said, we know that that stress level in your finances can have repercussions in the rest of your life in terms of your health and your anxiety levels and so forth. So what we've done is we've done a lot of webinar series on psychological first aid, resilience in challenging times, resilience in the face of disaster. So we've put together some webinar series, and they were very well attended. So they are up on our website right now so that you can go back and still look at them if that's a problem. We also did a podcast series that was all about financial and health wellness based on the anxiety of this time. And you can get that on any of your the apps that where you listen to podcasts, or as well as we'll show you a link where you can get it off our website as well. But we talked a lot about how to build those financial skills so that you can take those baby steps to get started, to just, make that unknown unknown. And a lot of times once you actually put the problem out in black and white, it doesn't seem as daunting because you can now start picking at it a little at a time and start chipping away and making a plan to move forward. We have other parts of that the podcast series are overcoming caution fatigue. We also did one with Professor Lasardi, who Andrea works with, and it was on financial literacy and financial fragility, which is a term of people who are not doing well in the short term, are very fragile. They can't come up with $400 or $200 if there's an emergency that arises. And so if you find yourself in that position, life can be very stressful. So we do have a lot of resources on our website if you find yourself in this situation. And again, we've really focused a lot of our education in this area and revamped a lot of our programs during the pandemic time so that when we go back out in person and our future offerings that are going to be in webinars and workshops will be focused in this particular area.
Thank you, Janet. Now, to kind of wrap things up together, we find that from Andrea's research, the financial knowledge is really important, and the link that it can provide to providing improved, like if you have the financial knowledge, then that can translate into being able to use that knowledge and have a improved financial well-being. We know that understanding our finances and such as the savings and the, like you said, the kind of looking into how you can even invest, right, your money, how we can feel better and be better prepared with our current finances, but also our long-term financial goals and plans. But not only that, then what Janet has provided us with the necessary tools that she shared today that can help also not only learn the knowledge, but also she provided just now the mental health kind of methods and strategies you can take advantage of to kind of cope and be able to get through and learn about how to deal with these financial situations and get the tools to prepare moving forward. So Janet, actually, for you to kind of summarize, you mentioned that we'll share the financial offerings. I'll let you take it away here.
Okay. Before I do that, I did notice there is a question in the chat that says, when you're in the late defined contribution plans, there's so many variables that are hard to be sure about, interest rates over your portfolio lifetime, your life expectancy, any other future crisis. How does financial literacy change that? Well, understanding how your portfolio should be structured so that it can handle those interest rate changes over lifetime. That's part of financial literacy. We do have an e-learning course for the lay defined contribution plan that talks about covering inflation. It talks about how compounding interest works so that you can figure out how your portfolio is going to grow over time. The Plan Ahead calculator that I mentioned does a lot. It has all of that financial literacy built in underlying it. It also, that calculator is versatile because you can put in unexpected expenses that might happen before retirement, and how would that throw you off? But probably the biggest thing is to have enough financial literacy in order to feel like you can talk or work with a financial advisor and understand what questions you need to ask and what they're telling you, so that you can discern whether the plan that the two of you are going to put together really sits comfortably with you, and that you're able to understand the risks involved and you're able to handle those risks and you feel like it's covering your goals. So it's really all tied together. It's not just, I know what inflation is, but it's kind of like, I know what it is and how it ties into my plan and what I'm worried about. And, working with someone is the best way to do that. And if you don't feel like you're comfortable going to a financial planner immediately, take advantage of our financial discussions, because they can help you get some of that vocabulary and some of that basic knowledge to help you move forward. Again, this is just a review of a lot of the resources that I talked about. If you go to cpg.org/learning, you will find a link to the podcast. You'll see a tab bar across that says finance, health. Those are all articles that are in that particular area, many of the topics that we've covered today. It also has the webinar series in there. So if you click on that link, you can get to all the webinar series. And it also has a link for conferences so that you can see when we're having webinars, virtual conferences, and then hopefully next year when we go out, our in-person conferences. The webinar series, I already said that. Oh, and on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, not always, but typically there will be some type of financial or health tip on our social media. So you can either do that through YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I switched those two around. And it's at Church Pension. So you can follow us there and you can get a lot of information with little finance tips and health tips, coping tips through our Facebook feed as well. And if you go to the next slide, this is how you can contact our two financial discussion folks, Larry Dresner and Anna Mullen. And you just call that number and you can talk with the representative on the line, and they have the schedules. Larry and Anna have times set out, and you can find a time. They'll call you and you can have a conversation, and you can, one of the things that they both like to do is they work with people over time. So once you start talking to them, you can continue, call them up every couple years, and they can look at, your situation and chat with you and so forth. So please take advantage of those resources. I see Jermaine also put the learning link in the chat. So,
yeah, and then just a final disclosure about the presentation, just a reminder that this is informational purposes only.